Hey everybody, I'm Russo. I do a little work here and there, and you are watching Raconteur Weekly, the monthly show where I talk about the things I've been doing the past few weeks, and some of the things that I might be doing in the weeks to come. Now, as the title suggests, we are here primarily to discuss these 5 dice, which are a set and which are sci-fi themed. Or I suppose I shouldn't say sci-fi themed necessarily, though that is the idea I had going in. First, though, I would like to look at some of those other things I was talking about. And we will start with something slightly related, that being boxes. And this is related because these sci-fi dice are going to need a sci-fi box. And what it means to be a sci-fi box currently is sort of up in the air. But I've made a lot of boxes here, so, boxes with lids, boxes with hinges, boxes that are tubes, or tiny roll-top bread boxes, but definitely none of those are futuristic, or sci-fi, I guess the word was, so that will take some thought. Next up, a different project, an old project, but one that is currently facing similar design challenges as the dice that are the topic of the video as a whole. So you have seen the blue book, and it's fine as a prototype, but now we have this, a white version, with a number of notable changes. Most importantly, perhaps, the inset channels for the binding threads to run through, which significantly reduce the chances that those threads are going to get caught and loosened. Past that, the other significant change is to the cover portion, which has been inset by a predetermined amount so that the slip cover, when it's made, will fit on flush. So that's exciting and coming along. But the design of these dice was sort of a necessary step to figure out exactly how that slipcover needs to be put together. So, moving on, I have a miniature that I'm wanting to sculpt, and the character is one that I think might have, well, what I consider you would call LARPing armor. So, in short, maybe you'd be able to guess who it is, but the character drinks a lot of Mountain Dew, so I figured they'd have a lot of craft liner board, and that's what this is. Not Mountain Dew boxes necessarily, but cereal box material, that sort of thing. And I have 2 examples here. This first one sewn to a scrap piece of cloth, and as such it sort of moves around like cloth. Of course, in some places you're going to want more of a plate, so while this design has 2 holes, here's another design with 4 holes, and while you probably should sew this to a piece of cloth, because hey, it would make it a lot easier, you technically wouldn't have to, and there you are, a semi-rigid panel. But these are my 2 test pieces, and I do need to see how much trouble it would be to make some type of garment out of this. It will, of course, have its limitations, but that's sort of the point of the whole project. I mean, the miniature itself is going to be kind of unrealistic, but I would like to know about how far realism can take me. So I don't know what kind of garment, maybe a cloak or a mantle. I think that's what they're called in the new Monster Hunter world, mantles. But that might be interesting, making patterns and different size scales and all that sort of thing. And changing the subject again, in last month's Raconteur Weekly, I put together this miniature for Blood Bowl games, and that was the whole video. We took it from the sprue to what you see here, and she did have a knife in one hand, but we made it into a microphone, as she is supposed to be a singer in a halftime show. So the point of mentioning this again is to say that that wasn't the only miniature I bought on massive sale that day. No, I also have this Dark Eldar Archon, which I'm really thinking about making into a referee. I mean, really, you just cut most of the sword away. I think leave that little bulb there because it looks like a whistle, and maybe add some string coming out the other side of the hand, complete that whistle look, and then, I don't know, cut the barrel off of the pistol, give it like a megaphone end, then hey, it's black and white checkerboards all the way. And I don't currently have a referee, so that would be a pretty cool thing. But I suppose we should get back to the topic at hand, which is the Sci-Fi 5-die set. And hey, here it is. The D6, D8, D10, D12, and D20. So how is it different from a 7-die set? No D4, no second D10, so that is no percentile D10. But you have these 5 dice, and as you can tell they have a unique numbering system, or not entirely unique, as you may recall something similar from a Kickstarter project a couple years back, the Bone Origins dice. And those had what I think they were calling bones and dots, really the whole point is you have two different symbols. One of them counts as 1, one of them counts as 2, and you just build upon those symbols. There they had dots and bones. Here we have dots and lines. And really, you can imagine using anything. Circles and X's, for example, but here it's dots and lines. And the exact configuration of the dots and lines is sort of catered to make it more, well, spacey. Like that Kickstarter, we have symbols for 1 through 10, but unlike the Kickstarter, we've come up with a way to do numbers 11 to 20, which is real simple. You just put circles around the numbers 1 to 10. So maybe not so easy from a dice making or a paper cutting perspective, but still pretty simple to read. And that, the reading of the dice, I guess brings us back to why there's no D4 and why there's no percentile D10, which is because, as you might imagine, or as you might remember if you saw that Kickstarter, there are alternate ways to read the dice. And yes, you can do this with any dice. Really, any dice. But the two symbol concept really simplifies things. So yeah, the idea is we have two symbols and one of them counts as 1 and the other one counts as 2 unless you want a half result. So if we did want a D4, we'd take the D8 and instead of counting 1 and 2, we would count 1 and 1. So any of the dice could have half results. And the reason that Bone Origin set only had these first 3 dice is because you can use any 2 dice to get double the result by using the second die as a binary between 0 and whatever the highest result on the first die would be. So in normal dice standards, just roll a die and flip a coin. But you do the binary by just checking to see dot or no dot. Dots is heads and no dots is tails, but you may have coins. Anyway, I suppose the exciting part about these is how they are made, which is, as I alluded earlier, almost entirely out of paper, or really cardstock. Here's the template for the D6, and these symbols are mirrored, though I think without too much trouble I should be able to move things around. And here you can really see what's going on. Each of these columns is one of the 6 sides of the 6-sided die. And as you go down, you're getting further and further to the inside. The idea here is to create little beveled panels. And with the D6, it's really easy. All of the planar angles are 90 degrees. So, a 45-degree bevel should get you where you want to go. And for that, each of the squares is offset, or made smaller on all the sides, by the thickness of the material itself. Which I suppose is an important point in itself. It's why you don't see templates in the description below. And that's because these templates are made for this paper. And if you had some other paper, it might be thicker or thinner. And then I would get comments saying how you tried to make one and yours looked terrible. Well, I apologize for that. But paper thickness is very important. Perhaps not so much in a D6, but consider the D10. Perfect D10 has 90-degree angles all around the equator, or, what you could call an equator, bounces up and down. All of the other planar angles, however, are something else. So you need to figure that out and divide it in half and figure out that unique offset depending on your material and the size you're building the thing, all that. Here is a little piece that I kept to show the difference in these offsets. So the first 2 of these are just straight offsets all the way around. The first one representing a 45-degree angle and the second one representing something steeper than that. The third is what the D10 pieces actually look like when they're glued together, and if you failed to do it this way, I bet you'd have a real dickens of a time putting that thing together. But yeah, that's a D6 and the D10. Here is a D12 to show you the basic idea, where we have 1 through 10, and then 1 and 2 again, with a shallow circle around them. So D8, we've seen all that. And D20, that's about as complicated as it gets. And the D20 is our other fringe case, or the reason we don't have a percentile D10, because what is a percentile D10 if not a D10 that just looks a little bit different? So staring down the template, I think you'll see that is exactly what this is. It's a 20-sided die, sure, but it is also a 20-sided, what would you call that? 1 to 10 times 2? It goes 1 to 10 twice. And the second time they're in circles, but you can roll percentage just using this as the tens, and how you would read that, well, I think it's best left for another video because disagreements will abound. So far here, I think everything's been civil. So other notes on construction. The dice would be, as you can imagine, hollow if they weren't filled with something, These I used sand, and as such none of them are completely filled. I know some people may disagree with the idea of putting sand inside of a die, because, it's moving around. But as long as you get them full enough, I think that is totally fine. Totally fine, because all it means is that the weight distribution is constantly going to change, and if any side is the heaviest side, well, it won't stay that way for long. Also, all that stuff bouncing around in there has a sort of a dead blow effect, where normally a die falls on the floor and it just shoots off. These will still shoot off, but they won't go that far, as the sand sort of acts as a dampening force. And I suppose you wouldn't have to use sand. Really, anything granular would work, just not anything that would clump. So powders are kind of out of the question. And while we're on the topic, I suppose you could just take a bunch of slices of paper and fill the whole thing in, but I don't know about that. I think it's more likely to throw off the balance. So if you have two choices, either make a mold and get a solid version, or do the sand thing. Really, these are just for funsies, and they're not going to see any real serious play. Like I said, how to build them, that is the important thing. Oh, and one other thing. This is an Instagram post. So that's right, RussoWorks is now on Instagram. Link, I suppose, in the description. And this is the first post in what I suppose you would call a cataloging project, because at this point, I have over 200 videos, and even for me, it's getting difficult to tell what is in any one of those videos. So, as you can see over here on Instagram, we got a bunch of pictures. We got a short description, we got the original description. We have the title, the day it was released, and the length of the video. So, it's going to take a minute, but starting next month, I'm going to see if I can't catalog all of these old videos, just a few at a time, until, eventually they're all up there, and you can look through that instead of clicking here through videos and watching like 30 seconds or a minute before you realize, hey, this is not exactly what I thought it was. I think it'll be helpful and a nice resource. But yeah, so that's all I got. And until next time, you've been watching Raconteur Weekly on RussoWorks, and I'm Rousseau. Out.